Welcome. This is Karen Sims with the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative show, the CU Try show, and we are really excited to have you back to join us. And I have two great guests, Nathan Stevens and Dr. Dynesha Grissom. It's been an adventuresome couple of weeks, and we hope to have a robust conversation about mending hope and healing in the face of community stressors and adversity. Just a reminder that the Trauma and Resiliency Show is funding through the Champaign County Mental Health Board, and it is a part of the Champaign County Community Coalition. So with that being said, I'm going to let them introduce themselves because they can always do a much better job than I can. So Nathan, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I actually would prefer beauty over, everything else.
I love we got the chivalry stuff happening already.
My name is Dr. Dynesha Grissom. I am a licensed clinical psychologist. I've been in the Champaign-Urbana community since around 2007, worked for quite some time at University of Illinois. This is my community, this is my home, my family's home, my children's home, and I currently work at psychology specialists in the community, and I'm here to answer questions as well as offer information, but I think what I'm more wanting to offer today is, how this is impacting everyone, including myself. And so I'll be very, very kind of honest at the onset of this. I'm a Black woman, that's a little obvious. And I have a Black family, and my family, just like many African-American or Black families, is hurting. I put on my face every day because I'm meeting with a lot of patients telehealth. And I will be honest and let you know that as we go through this process, you might see my face get unraveled. And I hope that that is helpful in some ways to understand that this is not a small thing. This is a big thing, and it's impacting us no matter what part of the Black community we are a part of. It is hitting all of us in a myriad of different ways. So I want to be honest and upfront about that.
Well, I think I shared when I asked you to come, I want this to feel like an honest conversation. Like, imagine us sitting around having a kitchen table discussion. Yeah. I do want to circle back around because I want to make sure we contextualize what we're talking about, because there are multiple levels of this conversation. So I feel like that'll be our next question, but thank you for your transparency and your vulnerability. As Brene Brown would say, for daring greatly, because I think that that's the only way that we can sort of help people really understand and see our stories. So thank you.
Yeah.
I am Nathan Stevens, and I have the honor of serving as the director of the Bruce D. Nesbitt African American Cultural Center here at the University of Illinois. It has been a privilege and an honor to do some of the work that I've done over the years involving racialized stress and trauma in Black men in particular, but in youth and in communities that are besieged by violence, both internal as well as external forms of oppression, bias and discrimination, economic policy, bias against the communities. And so having a conversation about those things is actually therapeutic in my opinion, and it's helpful to be able to talk about what it is we feel. It's interesting, Karen, when you sent me the questions, it was kind of interesting because when you asked and we'll get into more of that in a moment, how you feel. And I was like, well, it depends on the moment of the day. Yeah. Did I just eat? Did I gouge on some Oreos? To get my little pick me up. Those kind of things. And so really, without watching CNN, because it's as much value it is getting the information, it's also difficult. And so I've struggled. There's been moments that I've gone into my office at home and just kind of shut the door, listened to some Kirk Franklin, some Fred Hammond, shed my tears, and for my community, for myself, for my family, for everyone, for this nation, And anti-Black racism is global, so also for the world. And so, like I said, it depends on where I'm at and what I'm doing. My wife and I were talking about this time last year, we were in Spain and was at a social work conference, but we experienced some anti-Black racism in Spain, and so it's global. And so we'll talk more about that later, but so again, it depends on the context where I am and what's going on in my personal and professional life in terms of how I'm responding to this pandemic.
So you both sort of opened the door for the first question, right? But before I ask you the question that's at the table, I do want to remind people that they can, if you're watching it live, you can send us questions on Facebook. So join us if there are questions that you have for the panelists. If there are things that you really want to make sure that we talk about. You hear there's lots of wisdom in the room. So please, pick their brains, because this is a rare opportunity where you have great expertise. So imagine that, you're an alien looking in or this is recorded and you're tuning in. What would you say is the it you've been referring to? How would you describe the moment? And so that's where I'm going to start off with the first question. What is this moment and how is it? Yeah.
That's good. What is this moment? I would say that this moment is still yet to be defined. I try to be cautiously optimistic, but I'm also a bit of a cynical person. And so, again, those two ideologies and beliefs kind of temper one another. We've been able to do things as a nation that we claim we couldn't do. We came up with $2 trillion. And as a social worker, again, I'm my Black men in social work shirt. As a social work, it's kind of troubling and problematic to say, when we have this notion of interest convergence and the capitalistic interest of the country is combined with the human interest, then and only then can we move. And so coming back from that, this moment, it speaks to that, but it also speaks to, we have a diverse multicultural coalition across this nation that are demanding police reform in terms of how they engage Black and brown communities. And so, again, cautiously optimistic, because I know that the pendulum of progress tends to swing both ways. It can be progressive, but it has to swing back the other way. So this moment for me is yet to be defined, but I feel that if we continue to be diligent and cultivating these alliances as we've done the last couple of weeks, I'm definitely hopeful for my children, my children's children, and my children's children's children.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Dynesha, how would you define the moment? Because I hear an intersection between the COVID crisis and sort of the police, but I don't want to put words in your mouth. Yes. All right.
Yeah. So I guess if I look at it kind of globally, it's the COVID crisis pandemic. If I look at it kind of in terms of the US, it's the pandemic of racism that we have endured since 1619. Yeah. If I look at it in terms of, situating this in Champaign, Illinois, Urbana, Illinois, it's our children are hurting, and they're hurting one another because they are hurting. Yeah. And so it's kind of these three levels of pain and anguish. And we as Black people are being impacted in ways that we've always been impacted in this way. But the reality is, and I'm going to call it what I want it to be, I want this moment to be the beginning of a civil rights movement.
Wow.
That's what I want this to be. Okay. And whatever way I can help to make it that is where I want us to go. Yeah. So what I'm witnessing is the COVID crisis, that because Black people have been holding on to the legacy of racism, oppression, of discrimination, of evil, that beseeched this land when it was stolen, and Black people have carried it physically, emotionally, psychologically. We're looking at a legacy of when the pandemic of COVID has hit. Our blood pressure was already high. Our hearts were already hurting. We already had cardiac illnesses. We already had, substantial mental health illnesses because of 1619. And so we were injured disproportionately by COVID. And you add on top of that racism, so that when our people are entering the hospitals, they're told to go home. They're not treated. So we have this COVID global crisis. Then we have the pandemic of racism that has boiled to a head. It literally was a pimple that was seething and ready to burst. And it has occurred during COVID. And as a result, we are now in a situation where we witnessed a multitude of injuries to people who look like us, and we are bursting at the seams. And then we're in our community here locally where we are witnessing our children hurting one another, and it's because they have been backed into corners. They have experienced generations, multi-generations of racism and oppression, and they have been backed into literal corners, and they are exploding. I talk about, this experience with adolescence as literally a balloon that's popping. So you've added in stress, you've added in, kids are going to school, and teachers at the school are, I don't call it microaggressing, they're being racist towards our children. They're criminalizing them. They're making statements to them that places them in situations where they feel like criminals, or as if they've done something wrong. They watch white children do the same thing and not be suspended. They notice they're being treated differently. They're not given the same resources. They don't have adequate laptops and resources. They're not going on field trips. And they're noticing they're being treated differently at school. They go home and they're watching mom and dad work 3 and 4 jobs, still uninsured, underinsured, can't buy things tangibly that kids want. They're watching their family suffer and struggle, and they're backed into a corner, and they have no power, they have no voice, and they are exploding because the balloon keeps getting bigger. More stuff keeps getting added, and they pop. And we're wondering if we are as adults are feeling this overwhelmed, we wonder why our kids are popping. And so I see it on 3 levels.
I hear.
And it's painful. It's very painful. And, as a psychologist, I'm cautious about how I say things. I've not been as cautious about how I say things anymore.
Okay.
Because I see it for me in this time and space as if I don't rattle the system in the ways that I can rattle the system, and that is sometimes individually, then who will? So I'm calling this the next civil rights movement. I'm expecting it to be the next civil rights movement. I am doing what I can to make it the next civil rights movement. And my hope is that that's the direction that we will be going in.
So you said so much, right? So it's so rich, everything that you said. And I'm not original in saying this, but it seems like the conversions of the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and the COVID crisis, right? And we can also talk about all the other police brutality converging together makes people feel like they can't breathe. And this is the moment that people are saying, we want to catch our breath. We want
Yeah.
a space to breathe. We want space to live. We want space to exist. And you are hoping that, as you define it as civil rights, meaning the space where we change the structural inequalities and give
Yes.
people access to the things they need for life. And not just as like a suggestion, but as a fundamental right.
Yes.
Which is why I think people have started to join us, is that
Yeah.
people realize that the structural inequities and inequalities that have kept us oppressed, when people said, hey, meat packing plants are essential workers, workers realize like, oh, like our lives don't matter either, and that
Yeah.
we will dispose of a whole bunch of people's lives in a system that will keep us, right, not breathing, right? We will take
Yeah.
lives of people. So
Yeah.
Nathan, I'm sorry, I want to invite you back, but I love your
Sounds good.
reflection, so thank you.
And you hit on a key point, and the thing that I thought about was this notion of interest convergence, right? This notion of, and you asked one of your questions about mending, right? One of the challenges that we face in the Black community and in any marginalized or minoritized community, and when you look at, say, for example, Alcoholics Anonymous or something like that, until you recognize that it's a problem,
Yeah.
right? You don't begin to do the work of the fixing, the healing, the repairing, the mending. Again, going back to this notion of we don't have money for social services. Tupac once said, we got money for war, but can't feed the poor.
Yes.
And these are the kind of things that I think many working class people in America are tired of. I think there's beginning to be a crack in this impermeable white supremacist ideology that has been manifested in our society for so long, because I think some of our working class white folks are beginning to say, wait a minute, this impacts me too.
Yeah.
And our Latinx working community and our Asian Pacific Island working community and our indigenous working community, and all of these folks are coming together saying, wait a minute, because if you're doing the same thing to them that you're doing to me, and if they're having some similar experiences, then it's not just me that's having this problem. Yeah. It's not just my community, but it's all of us. And then I think we're beginning to take the time to kind of break down, this systemic inequality. And then you hit the key on the head in terms of hurt folks. And Ken, the trainings that you do, you talk a lot about, people who have experienced trauma, especially violent trauma, tend to respond to perceived threats violently. Resma Menikin in his book, My Grandmother's Hand, said something that I never really fully understood. He said, that is why you may see someone in a barbershop shoot someone else with diss in their shoe. It was never about the shoes. It was your diss made me feel belittled, and it may have taken away the little bit of sense of self that I had. And while it doesn't justify taking someone else's life, it actually makes sense from the standpoint of I can't allow you or anyone else to take the last vestige of hope and selfhood and personhood that I have. That's also why I believe, we're starting to see people fight police officers back, because it's like, if I run, you'll shoot me in the back. And so I think people are out of desperation, they're angry, they're frustrated. And so we're getting these protests in a positive sense. But I think there's also some of the destruction that people are decrying, also frustrations. I'm tired of this. I'm tired. And, I've seen the frame. I can't keep quiet. I have a Black son and a Black daughter and Black grandchildren, but I'm also concerned about the poor children across all communities, because that is who tends to be disproportionately negatively impacted by all of this, is the poor. And so we have to start looking at this to say, we're definitely going to roll up our sleeves and to fix some of the things in the Black community, to heal some of our children, to heal some of our hurts and our wounds. But we also have to understand that until we begin to dismantle the systems of oppression, we're going to continue to be pitted against one another. And as we're healing, others are going to be reared up against us. And so how are we building multicultural, intercultural coalitions and relationships to say, how can we help you heal? And how can you help us heal? So it's a mutually beneficial arrangement. So that, because again, one of the commonalities is that most of us come from disadvantaged, poor, marginalized communities.
Yeah. Yeah.
So right, you guys are like, right, so content rich and so much to unpack. I am going to put parentheses around the causes of civil unrest, right? I want to bracket that because I think that is some social distress. I think it is some propaganda. I think it's a hodgepodge of stuff. But I do want to pick up on what you were saying is what would you say, as if you were speaking to the larger audience, we're sitting around, what do you see as strengths that have sort of bumbled up? Like what, right? Because I know a lot of times we have sort of a deficit mindset and people only see problems.
Yeah.
As I sort of observe things, I also see so many strengths in locally, statewide, nationally, globally, right? If we're going to take all those layers, what would you see as some of the strengths that have sort of emerged in this moment?
Yeah, I'm seeing unification. I am seeing people gathering together and helping one another towards a cause. I am seeing people learn how to take care of themselves in better ways because they have gotten to the point where they're overwhelmed and they realize that if I continue to be this overwhelmed, I am too going to pop.
Yeah.
And so there have been some creative ways that people have learned to take care of themselves. With just COVID, I saw a nation that once had everything at a price, remove the price, make it free, so that people had access to the resource.
Yeah.
I saw people who are paying for that resource continue to pay for that resource.
Yeah.
I'm talking specifically about Xfinity and Comcast.
Yeah.
For the longest, we have talked about how in this country, probably globally, it is imperative that everyone have access to the internet.
Yeah.
Right.
People can't function without access to the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I've watched service providers, Xfinity, Comcast being one of them, say, we're going to grant you this freedom, access. One of the issues that was a concern before was, well, who will pay? Well, my family kept paying.
Right.
Other families kept paying that could afford it. I watched resources online for children and education for children become free. And these entities are still operating. And so I watched as a nation that is based on capitalist fundamental views opened up opportunities for things to be accessed by all and free. And those entities still exist. They're still able to pay their people. They're still surviving.
Mm-hmm.
They're still thriving. Their CEOs are still making millions and billions as they did before because people didn't stop paying. In fact, people like me are motivated to pay a little more because I know that my kids' friends in school don't have access, now have access. Well, I'm cool with contributing a little more. Sure.
Right.
So I witnessed a country that has said for so long, we can't take care of one another and, we need to, everybody should be personally accountable and pay for. I witnessed that same country decide we've got to make access to people and we can do this and we can still survive. And so I witnessed people coming together.
Yeah.
In terms of the civil rights movement, I am watching people of all colors and all kinds come together to promote Black lives.
Yeah.
I am watching as white people, Asian people, Latina people, all over the world, other peoples have decided if you company are going to speak about Black lives in this way, we are going to divest. And we don't want your services anymore. So I'm witnessing a lot of strengths around people coming together. Yeah. And that is very encouraging. It's also very important because if this is the next civil rights movement, we're going to need waves of people with energy. This is the first wave of energy. Yep. We need somebody else, a group. So when this group goes to lay down and take a nap, we need another wave to come in. And when that wave is tired and goes and take a nap, we need another wave to come in so that it doesn't stop. So then the first wave has had 2 cycles of sitting and resting. They can come back in and the third cycle sit down, so that we need this constant movement. And the only way that's going to happen is if we are connecting, we are sharing in this pain, we're not distancing ourselves from it, but we are working together, sharing our resources, whether that's time, energy, money, whatever that is, and we're making it happen. So those are some of the things that I'm very encouraged about, very excited about.
Okay, so those are great things. I want to add one little, I'm not going to say which company, but not only did they transform their financial practices, they also did some staff training. So when I would call with a customer service, people knew to do some, are you okay? Yes. And how are you feeling? Questions, yes. Right? So just humanizing our experiences. Somehow in the middle of this distress, in a record time, we added staff development and training, and we started talking about social and emotional stuff, and people started getting concerned. And I was like, what happened to, we can't change protocol to make it more human or more quote unquote trauma informed. So yes, I love that. And Nathan, I'm going to let you chime in. We've got 2 really great questions coming in. The other question I want to say, statement I have is, I do want to echo that this is a journey for the long haul. Yeah. So I don't have my glasses on, so I can't read all the details, but when we think about civil rights, it was a multiple prong attack. So we need everything. We need folks who are going to be on the streets, who were planned, right? Because those meetings didn't happen randomly. They were, protest are a tactic. They're not a strategy. So we need, right, like people who are doing some planning and organizing. We need people working on the legal piece. We need people who are artists and creating art to help remember the story and to help. We need people who are our healers. I think sometimes people romanticize and they only remember the pictures. But the way the civil rights movement worked was people bloomed where they were planted, and where you had power, people used their power collectively. And we were all moving the ball in the same direction. And so the more disjointed and disconnected we are, the less power we will have. And so, I'm amazed. I think, the fact that people frequently want to do their own projects is actually a sign of our woundedness as a community. Yeah. Because it's a sign that we don't trust each other. Right. Because collectively we have power. Right. And so whatever we need to do, and I'm going to look to you, Nathan, but whatever we need to do to help heal some of those wounded spirits and hearts so that we can work together to this end for the duration, because we will burn each other out. Yeah. Oh yeah. The work is so much harder when we work in isolation. And I think the powers that be, not that I'm conspiratorial, love it when we don't work together, when we work against each other, right? The powers that be, because then we don't get anywhere. And then they could say, oh, we gave them so much money or so much resources, and look at what they did. They didn't do anything with it. But when we work collectively together, we can move things across the finish line.